Welcome everyone to the very first Men of Issachar podcast. I wanted to bring some of my very wise friends to the table and discuss some topics that are pretty pertinent to Christ seekers of today. We walk through a range of topics, from books to farming to Marxism. So I hope you enjoy. This is the Men of Issachar podcast, and what we want to do, we want to discuss and just hit on topics that are relevant to Christians and to the Big C Church. My name is Jason Gall. I'm a bison farmer and technology dude from Cookeville, Tennessee. These are some of my friends I brought to the table. I just wanted to introduce you to them. The headmaster of Hickory Classical Christian School in Cookeville, Tennessee, Mr. Terry Gant, and the pastor of Midway Baptist Church in Cookeville, Jeff Wright.
Jason, thanks for kicking this off for us, man. I appreciate you doing that. I'm interested in talking with you fellas.
Yeah, this ought to be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Somebody fire.
All right. Well, let's start. We probably should start with our the name, right? Men of Issachar. Seems kind of obscure if you don't know, but this comes from First Chronicles. This is a reference to a Bible verse where the men of Issachar are described as the men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. So we got two things going on there, right? We've got understanding the times and then knowing what to do. I think this is going to be kind of a grab bag of a podcast, but hopefully at least some of what we talk about is what's going on and ethics, right? Like what actual actions do we take based on what's going on?
Well, I think that's got to be a fundamental Christian virtue, or ambition for men, right? So who do we need in households? Who do we need in churches? Who do we need in parachurch things like classical Christian schools, or even to know, hey, we ought to be educating our children classically. How do we help get that started? Well, it's people who've done the work to know what's going on and what the Bible has to say about how you meet it. And I mean, honestly, as a pastor, one of the things that's troubling to me is that the church is clearly set up for older, wiser men and women to teach younger men and women the path of wisdom in a practical way. Right? But it feels like we're just suffering from a lack of that. There's been kind of a confluence of things, commercialism, attractional church models. And so if we're going to have that at any time soon, we're going to have to be pursuing that. I don't know that I'm a man of Issachar right now. I trust that you guys are, but it's definitely an ambition and something I'm giving my energies to try to cultivate.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I want to strive for. And something God's just been showing me lately is, and Terry is part to blame with this because Terry, he was my Sunday school teacher for a long time. And we touched on beauty, we touched on a couple different subjects, but it really drove home the point that being a Christian and following Jesus is more about direction than it is what level you are. Because we're all different, and I don't think we can be compared to one another fully, and certain things we surely can. But I think it's more about direction and about who your life points to. Like we're called to be man after God's own heart, and to seek hard after Jesus. If just for an example, like if you look at beauty, the beautiful things, in my opinion, are the things that point to Jesus. Like art, as far as art goes, as far as music goes, there's tons of stuff that's that's pleasing in this world that the world would consider beautiful, which I don't think is beautiful.
Sure. Or you're supposed to pretend like it's beautiful when everything internally says this is hot garbage.
Yeah, see, I don't even know. Like your point stands, but we have a lot of people who would put art in front of you, and if you were to say that is not beautiful, they'd say, well, it isn't supposed to be. And
that's true.
It kind of begs the question of like, what is the point of the art if beauty is not at least one of the things you're trying to do with it? And there's lots of different answers we hear from contemporaries on that, but
what does it point to and why?
Right. So classically, art and beauty was understood to reflect something that was reflective of God, his design, his own handiwork, right? Art has been reduced to self-expression, and that's why they can put a toilet up and say, it is meaningful to me, therefore it must be artistic. I was late to the game on objective beauty, but it just seems so hard to quantify. But the tumbler that kicked for me was, I believe in objective truth. I believe in objective goodness. And since those two concepts are so tightly wedded to beauty in Scripture, beauty must also have an objective nature. And I think I've kind of located it in, does it tell the truth about who God is and what he's done? So there is a way out of this morass of modern art. But like everything else, to your point about direction, it involves a return to pursuing the truth about who Jesus is and what he's done. The Mona Lisa is an easy example, right? I'm not entirely sure what Christian ambitions may have driven that creation, but it is a painstaking effort to capture a particular woman's countenance. And woman is a creation of God, and the fairer creation of God, who kind of embodies beauty. So that's what I have in mind when I say something true about Jesus or what he's done. Again, pastoral landscapes, I love those things. I think the reason I love them is because they reflect something that's actually accurate about the beauty of God's creation. Doesn't mean everything has to be overtly doctrinal in its artistic representation, but it should tell the truth about Christ and his creation.
Yeah, I would agree with all that.
Hey, I'm curious if we're talking about the kind of what's going on right now. I think for me, I'm still living in the wake of Charlie Kirk's life and assassination broadly, right? Like,
sure.
That's kind of the big topic that's still, what are we, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out?
Yeah.
It's more than two.
More than two.
Or maybe
September 10th. So
yeah, okay, so quite a bit out.
Today's October 1st when we're recording this.
Yeah. That's still true for y'all. If you're thinking about like a national context, still the most dominant thought. I'm just curious where you're at since it's been more like 20-something days. I think we all initially went through a state of horror. And then I think probably for most of the men that I know, a visceral rage. Then there seems to have come after that a clarion call to continue his work. Any developments from there? I'm just curious for y'all.
No, I mean, it seems now that it's almost like the death of Charlie Kirk is almost like a lens through which I'm viewing like subsequent things. And like I've been watching, for example, the ICE versus Antifa clashes in Chicago, and I just see them as downstream. I know there's not a direct connection that I'm aware of between those two things, but I think, okay, this was left-wing violence that we've got with the murder of Charlie Kirk. This is, and you know, I've been underwhelmed with the response, and therefore it's emboldened the same kinds of elements to perpetrate further violence. So I see it as it's not the first left-wing violence we've seen. An argument could be made that it's not even the most brutal or severe. It was the most possibly shocking just because of the nature of how it went down. But this isn't the first person that they've killed for their beliefs or for being different. And but for some reason, this one really just captivated my thoughts as well. And I don't know if it's right to say I'm looking at everything kind of now through that lens, but that's just sort of where my head's at.
Yeah, I'm definitely dealing with a lot of different angles looking at, because I'm both sad and encouraged by what's come after it, because there have been so many people that it has exposed evil in our world in a way that's undeniable, and they don't have any legs to stand on anymore. And there's a lot of people that are converting back to Christianity because they see the truth in the true nature of the side they're serving versus the side Charlie Kirk was serving.
Sure. I mean, it's a pretty visceral example of it's either Christ or chaos, that there's no third alternative. which is helpful in the long run because it kind of re-shocked us into reality. We've had it so good as a country for my adult life and beyond, earlier even than that. I think we got pretty complacent about the benefits of Christ given to us. And this is one of those times where the Lord reminded us that, no, actually it's directly a gift from me. And if my hand of blessing is removed, if I'm provoked in such a way that judgment increases, you're not going to like that world. And so of course, you wouldn't want to pull Charlie out of heaven, but in a general sense, we'd rather have Charlie alive. But it's clearly one of those times where the Lord has brought really good out of evil. But to kind of leapfrog from that back to what you said, Terry, pursuit and driving out the enemy, I think, to say it in a more healthy way, I feel more ambitious than I've ever been. There's so much remaining good in our culture that I guess I had just become a little black-pilled toward. Now you look everywhere and you see it.
Well,
but I am frustrated there's not more follow-up.
Yeah, and so many people cared when Charlie died. I wasn't a giant Charlie Kirk fan before. I didn't dislike him, but I didn't watch his stuff regularly. But I knew who he was, and I thought that his work was fine and good. And there's probably a lot of people like me who had heard of him but didn't follow him, and they were still outraged by what happened. And it's because of what Charlie represented, in addition to just the outrage of his specific murder. And people have not, it doesn't seem like it's had the same effect that the left probably hoped it would, which is the kind of the silencing of people like him. It's just fired up people more. Yeah. And Charlie's unique. He may not be able to necessarily just be easily replaced, in spite of what appears to be some efforts to do so. But if there's a million Charlie Kirks and each one of them has 10% of his talent, then that's still a lot of people doing some good and working to try to make things better.
I think he planted a lot of seeds, and I think they're coming to fruition now because of his death. Mm-hmm. I think his death sparked a lot of thoughts and he planted a lot of wisdom that is now coming to fruition, and it's coming out through different outlets, and I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really to get down to like what's needful in this moment, kind of the theme of the podcast. And it again ties to your idea about I've just been not impressed by the follow-up to deal with his murderers and things like that. I guess the thing that this far out from it is, I guess the thing I feel most pressing on me is that it's time for all gas, no brakes.
Yeah.
Every godly ambition should be pursued. We should be completely done with theological and civic compromisers. There's, kind of the idea that, well, both sides have strengths to offer. I just think it's time to let that stuff be evaporated.
Well, I think that's one of the great awakenings that's kind of happening, is that there was a time when you could articulate that the right and the left both want the same things and they have different methods. And that's clearly not true anymore, which has not been true for a long time. But I think this has woken up a lot of people to the reality that this is not a discussion about methods. This is a discussion about outcomes, and it's existential. There's going to be a winner and a loser, and this is not like tomorrow we're going to wake up and it's going to be a communist takeover. But in the long run, we're fighting against evil and darkness, and they are fighting against good. And I had an article just at American Reformer, and it was about the vanishing middle ground, and it was done in the context of classical schools. Like, that's kind of what I had in mind, because I was reacting to a tweet where someone was trying to ride the fence on this and articulate that, like, well, classical is really just about human beings. It's not about right versus left. And my position is that classical schools need to be done with that. They need to just openly acknowledge that they're right-wing institutions and guard that. And it seems clear that with Charlie's death and the outcome, which Jason, you were referring to, like the exposure of the evil and how widespread. Now, a lot of the people that were celebrating his death would never pull a trigger themselves, but they are endorsing and enjoying other people's evil deeds and celebrating those. So whatever middle ground that there has been is really drying up quick, and it's gotten to the point where you kind of need to pick a side, or you're going to find yourself with no allies, and both sides are going to either not trust you or outright hate you, which I think has been true for the left for a while. They've always been, as far back as I can remember, if you're not 100% in lockstep with whatever today's dogma is, you're out. The right's more tolerant, but the tolerance is starting to go away. And if you're not on our side, we're just going to assume you're with them. So I think classical schools in particular need to be thinking in those terms, because that's what their constituency ultimately, I think, wants. And they've just got to be prepared, because the left is going to continue to come for them, even if they try to ride the line. Nobody's going to tolerate the Kellerism like they used to. That's just clearly a broken approach.
Well, what you just said about classical schools, I think, is certainly true for the church as well, and for the same reason. So Tim Keller, who I believe is probably in heaven, nonetheless gave a pretty terrible legacy of sort of always catering to the left, holding the right at an arm's distance as an idea of an evangelistic strategy. Well, it collapsed probably by the time Keller died, if not immediately thereafter. New York is no different, because Tim Keller wanted to make Christianity palatable to urban elites. But America's different, because Charlie Kirk was very clear about where the lines were and what the unavoidable alternatives were.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're saying about a classical school, I think is certainly true of the church as well. Ultimately, the kingdom transcends categories of right wing and left wing, but those categories reflect greater conformity or less.
Right.
And we should be unashamed about which that is. Mm-hmm. And it's time to be done with sort of let's tiptoe around the feelings of people who, think that the left is more compassionate. Let's just talk in frank moral categories, call people to join in. And if you're not going to, we're going to move on without you.
Yeah.
I would love to talk just a little bit. I don't know how much you guys know about Marxism. I guess it's my opinion that Marxism is a core principle that a lot of the left adheres to, but most of them don't even know about Marxism.
Sure.
They just know some of the components of Marxism. And I think that if those things were exposed, people might get a better picture of the left and some of the tactics that they use, such as division and posing people groups against people groups.
Sure.
Just some of the mentalities. Do any of you guys have any wisdom on that, or does that spark any thought?
It's been a while since I've read the Communist Manifesto, but I have read it. And then he's got his other big book, Das Kapital, or just Capitalism, I think is often what it's translated into. So I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to succinctly summarize Marx's view.
I mean, all of life is class struggle.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, it's basically trying to, in my opinion, what the goal of Marxism is to create a utopianistic society without God.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think it's interesting to think about what you're saying with methodology. So, yeah, I've read Marx. I'm familiar with the Frankfurt School. And really the kind of insanity of the project, but you see it everywhere. The insanity of the project through the Frankfurt lens is that if society can be reduced to rubble, a new order of utopia will spring forth spontaneously. It's insane in a way that's hard to think that any rational human being would embrace. But that's really what they believe. If we can destroy all of this new order is going to leap into existence. And that's why you see cities burned and people mutilated and all that. They really actually believe the route to growth is destruction. That's what we're up against. We're up against a totalizing worldview that says the only way forward is to destroy everything.
And its kind of ultimate goal is a pure form of egalitarianism, sort of. There's always ulterior motives, and I don't think that Marx would have been okay with just being one of many. He would have wanted to be an elite. That tends to be the way it is with these movements. But
well,
the idea
he came from a wealthy family, right? Like, I mean, he was kind of a ne'er-do-well from a fairly well-to-do family.
He was sort of he was kind of like a freeloader off his roommate when he grew up and started writing and things like that. But Yeah, I mean, it's the egalitarianism. I think it gets back to the really the core of it, which is they hate God and they don't want there to be a God, and they want to be like God, and they want to get everybody else on board with their radical vision. So they say we can all just be like God together, and we'll just be equal, and everything will be fine. No problems will happen because everyone will be the same. Just kind of reducing humanity to like an amorphous mass. And we see this with even with like transgenderism, you have this idea that gender's nothing. It can be changed. It's mutable. It's just whatever your preference is, because it doesn't really matter. That's kind of what the bottom of that philosophy is. It's just your preference of how to express yourself, and everybody's all the same, and there's no real differences worth mentioning.
And I think that's ultimately the destruction of the family.
Yeah.
I mean, where that's trying to take us.
Well, where else is hierarchy more clearly visible, right, between parents and children, husband and the rest of the family? And in long term, like on a long enough time scale, nations in many cases just emerge from clans, right? Like Tolkien references this with one of the hobbits that talks about how he moved across the water, had a bunch of kids, they had a bunch of kids. After 2 or 3 generations, he basically had his own city and country of his own. That was all just descended from him.
Goals.
Yeah.
Goals right there.
Yeah.
Y'all have heard me talk about this in multiple contexts, but to that point, I think you can go even beyond family or church or all these institutions, in that it's ultimately an anti-creation project.
Yeah.
So, just quick summary. When you meet the world in Genesis, it's formless and void. And the way God does what we call creation is he begins to shape with boundaries and distinctions. Light separated from dark, day from night, man from woman, right? And so all these categories of distinction are intrinsic to the order that God has established. And Marxism really does fundamentally seem to be, let's get rid of every possible distinction, right down to the distinction between man and woman.
Well, even to the distinction of changing definitions of words. I mean, it talks about that.
Sure. And to your point about their tactics and are people aware, one of the first questions that came out of Charlie's murder was, why Charlie? He's like the nicest among us, right? Well, again, with the Frankfurt school, they pulled off what's famously called the long march through the institutions. They, particularly higher education, or I say higher education, all education
in general, yeah.
So this is going to take generations, but we're going to capture educational institutions because they understand, in a way the church has been lazy in understanding, that education is discipleship. And so they capture institutions. Everybody knows higher education is in chaos. Everybody knows the government school system is in chaos. That's because they did the long march through the institutions. Charlie was running their playbook against them. He was going to their territory, these captured institutions, and saying, I'll change the minds of young people. I think part of the reason he was so hated is that he was doing back to them what they had pulled off on a sane world. Absolutely. Generations ago.
He was so effective.
Well, I have just read something about, I was comparing him to Socrates, and he was killed for similar reasons.
That's apt, yeah.
Because Socrates was basically embarrassing the intelligentsia of his day, and so they charged him with corrupting the youth, and they killed him for it. And that's pretty similar. Like, he's questioning the current dogmas that are accepted by academia, and he's, if nothing else, even if he doesn't get everybody on board with his particular views, he's embarrassing the professoriate, right? He's showing that they don't know very much.
It's sort of the emperor's new clothes.
Right.
He's sitting there pointing out, well, those guys are naked.
No.
Yeah, and I really do think it offends sort of the Marxist sensibility that, I mean, you've seen it with the state, at least in my adult life, from the Obama administration, where they were saying, we're going to extend the school day. And I remember his Secretary of Education, I can't remember the dude's name, but he had a background in basketball. He played in an Ivy League. But he said, look, parents they don't have to deal with the hassle of taking care of their kids. So let the government school system feed them dinner. Let them, let us watch them. We'll take them out of your hair. The Marxist worldview basically understands that children are the property of the community. And they operate along those lines. And that's why they hate Christianity so much, but it's also why they hated Charlie, because Charlie was coming in and taking what they understood to be their property and giving an off-ramp from that. I just think the way that you and I would feel if somebody had broken into our house and stole some priceless family heirloom, I think that's how the left saw Charlie Kirk. How dare you take this thing that is quintessentially ours, which is the mind of
we
young
stole
people.
it fair and square.
Right. How dare you steal it back?
Jeff, are you reading anything interesting right now?
Yeah, I'm reading a book by David Haynes called Natural Theology. I'd recommend it. So natural theology gets a bad rap in Reform circles. I'm part of the Reform tradition as a Baptist. Presbyterians out there can freak out about that if they want, but I am. And so David Haynes is presenting a vision of what we would call natural law and showing that it's very consistent with the Reformed tradition. And I actually think it's a really relevant and needed topic right now. Not to bore anybody, but there was a famous apologist in Reformed circles named Cornelius Van Til. And Van Til is helpful because he demands that we view the Christian worldview as absolute. So he would say, if I'm a believer and Terry's not a believer, when we look at a single rose, we do not see the same thing in absolute terms. I see a thoughtfully crafted expression of God's creative goodness. Terry sees a random product of atoms bumping into each other. So I don't hate Van Til. I think he's very helpful in that way. But Van Til, you can imagine, if Van Til is that absolute on Christians and non-Christians don't understand the world the same, he doesn't have a category for something we would share in common, like a natural law that says Terry, if he represents unbelievers in this hypothetical, Terry has no reason to believe that murder is wrong. As a Christian, I definitely do. But what we know from human experience is, broadly, even pagans recognize that murder is wrong. And so Haynes is kind of recovering that we can meaningfully talk about a natural law that governs, and I mean that Christians have in fullness because we're aided by the special revelation of Scripture, but that everybody has access to. And the reason I think it's timely is that the nature of what it means to be a conservative is still very much up in the air, right? Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan. Who gets to be the gatekeeper on which of those guys is more right anyway? Well, I think the essence of conservatism is conserving any attainment of honoring the natural law, God's natural law. And so I'm thankful Haynes wrote the book because it's giving what I think is a roadmap to conservatives. I can work in the civic arena with someone who understands that men are men and women are women, because we actually do both have access to a natural law. You know, outside of that civic project, I'm going to try to help that person understand why that is and what the ramifications are. But we can actually be conservatives together in a civic project insofar as we both aspire to conform to God's natural law, if that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. It's good. I'd recommend it. There's a bigger volume set of books that he wrote, and I'm not a fan of Davenant Institute, but Davenant published a more approachable sort of distillation that he wrote that's aimed at lay readers. I'd recommend both. It's really good. What about you?
Well, I just started reading, like I said earlier, it's kind of a biography of John Sevier, which it's relevant. We're recording this in Tennessee, and Sevier was our first governor and one of the founding fathers of Tennessee. So the book is from the 1800s. It's called The Rear Guard of the Revolution. And it's kind of a biography of Sevier, but it's really more about like the formation of the settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains in the early, or in the 1750s and 60s leading into the American Revolution. And there's a second book called John Sevier, Commonwealth Builder, I think is the title. And I've got that one on the shelf. I'll probably read next. But this is relevant to me because our school has a hall system, and my hall is Sevier Hall. So I'm trying to learn more about him. And I kind of was afraid that this would be drudgery. I'm interested enough in the guy, but history books are a mixed bag in that regard. And it's really well written. It's very fascinating. So I've actually found it to be quite a page turner. And it's just as a Tennessean reading about where our people came from, what they were like when they first came, how much courage, how much they endured, is just really rewarding.
Terry, we talked about it before we hit record, but I think our listeners will be profited by you giving a description of what they kept in their saddlebags.
Oh yeah, sure. So the early settlers, when they came over the mountains, there were no roads. They had they could bring what they could carry and what they could basically put on one horse. So in addition to their families, who had to either walk or go on horseback, they would bring along the food that they needed for the trip, a little bit of kitchen utensils and tools that they would need to build, gun, of course, powder, shot, that sort of thing. And they would bring whatever books that they had. And their libraries basically consisted of a Bible, Isaac Watts's hymn book. They would bring like a reader or a spelling curriculum for kids to help them with the education of the young, a copy of Robinson Crusoe, Fox's Book of Martyrs, Pilgrim's Progress. And I feel like I'm forgetting one. But...
Well, that set you've just described may be the best, like, proto-educational curriculum I could imagine, not just for settlers, but for humans.
Well, that's the kind of things that they were educating their children with, and they would sit around the fire at night and read aloud. So that was the education of the early American settler. And according to this historian, almost all of them were able to read and write, because they have some charters that were signed by everybody in town, about 200 people. And there might be one or two names that were signed like with X's, right? That would be in lieu of a signature because they didn't know how to write. So very few people were uneducated in the way that sometimes the South and old people from olden times, or it's just assumed they aren't as educated as we are, but they probably had a higher literacy rate than moderns.
Well, if you take the content of what they're consuming, I would take that over a lot of the modern curriculum we have foisted upon us today.
Yeah. It's funny, though, because we don't read Robinson Crusoe, but we do Fox's Book of Martyrs, of course, the Bible. We sing hymns by Isaac Watts to this day. Yeah. And we read Pilgrim's Progress. They just got done with that. So, it's just funny. The things that have stood the test of time that Christians have always looked to and recognized, this is a great work. And it's full of truth, goodness, and beauty.
Well done, kind of bringing it full circle there.
Yeah.
And you also told me a fun fact about bison.
Oh, yes. Oh, you want me to relate that one as well? Okay,
Sure.
So when they came over, they brought some of the very early pioneers planted some fields, right? They just sow corn. So when they got to the areas where they were going to settle, there was some kind of corn growing. They had a little bit of kind of pre-seeded crops, but not a ton. So they had to supplement their larders with whatever game they could trap and hunt. And when they were in Carolina and Virginia, they were accustomed to shooting a lot of turkey and deer, which they liked pretty well. When they got into the valleys on the other side of the Allegheny Mountains, they found massive herds of buffalo, the North American bison, that is. And so they shot some of those because those things had absolutely no fear of people, so they could get pretty close to them. Probably not too close, but a little bit close. And they shot those, and when they had sampled the buffalo meat, they said that they basically lost their taste for every other kind of meat because it was just so good. They're like, all right, deer tonight because we're out of buffalo, but I'll get another one tomorrow. Don't worry, everyone.
And just FYI, the reason I like that is because we raised bison here in Cookeville, Tennessee. So that kind of tickled me when he exposed that fact.
Well, I come from generations of beef farmers. I love beef. Bison's better. And I think that everybody who comes in contact with it kind of has to realize that. I took a group of buddies on a football road trip this week, and we ended up at this country kind of meat and three restaurant. And a bunch of guys were like, give me the meat and three. But a couple other guys who don't like that style of food were like, can I get a menu? We're going to get burgers. And as everybody's eating a burger they really liked, it sort of spontaneously developed like, yeah, but have you had a bison burger? Again, I love beef. I'm not coming at this objectively. Bison's incredible. I'm not surprised at all by that story.
Yeah. Sadly, they nearly eradicated them from this area, but that's what Jason's doing, the good work of restoring the North American bison to their natural habitat. We need them back.
And my dinner table.
Yes.
You just have to prepare it a little bit different, but fun facts that it has less fat than chicken or salmon. It has higher mineral and vitamin content than beef. It has more omega-3 fatty acids and all that stuff. So it's
delicious.
just fun.
What's the best cut? Is it similar to is a fillet still the best, or sirloin?
I think the ribeye.
Okay.
I would argue that the ribeye is, just because it's such a leaner animal, and the ribeye still contains some of that fat.
Yeah.
So if you cook a ribeye from a bison correctly, you can cut it with a fork. It's so good. So good.
So the book specifically mentioned that they ate a lot of buffalo tongue.
Yeah, a lot of people, we sell a lot of buffalo tongue.
Yeah, I've had I've had beef tongue, and it was fine. I liked it pretty well.
Especially in the Hispanic community. They love tongue. They cook a lot of dishes with tongue.
What about organ meat?
We do. We sell liver. We sell heart. I'm starting to get requests for a lot of the different tallows and things. So
okay.
I mean, again, just to come back to sort of the theme of God's goodness and His creation, you think about what a gift this continent was to our people. You had the American chestnut everywhere, and you had bison just walking around. And I mean, I don't know.
In addition to the other things that we're more accustomed to, right?
Yeah.
Like deer, white-tailed deer, or turkey, other game animals.
elk, everything.
What a gift. I've often speculated that maybe ingratitude is the fundamental American sin.
Maybe so.
Because you just cannot categorize or quantify what a gift this continent is.
Well, the book records that the early settlers, it talks about Daniel Boone, who's one of the earliest ones who came over and kind of charted the way. James Robertson is also prominently featured in the book, which if you're from Nashville, you will notice that name because there's James Robertson Parkway. And I think Nashville still has what I assume is a reproduction of his log home that he settled there when it was still French Lick, before it was called Nashville. And he knew General Donaldson, father of Rachel Donaldson, who became Andrew Jackson's wife. So there's a lot of intermixing. But when they first came over and they crossed the mountains, it says pretty much universally, everybody that looked down into the valley, that's where like Knoxville region is now. They were like, this is Eden, this is paradise. And if you're from that area, you may be like, I don't know, it's fine, but I don't know. And it may have been better back then, or it may be that it just was like, this has got the best climate. It's got everything that you need. The soil is better here than it is on the seaboard, which is where they were all coming from. They were all coming from mostly Virginia by way of North Carolina. And they, a group of 200 settlers moved over to Watauga near the river there and established a camp and did okay getting along with the Cherokee in the region for a while. And then their first big hiccup was when King George came along and said, you can't be over here, because I decided not to. And it wasn't too many years after that they decided that they didn't care for that, and they had fisticuffs over it, one might say.
Yeah, sounds great. Jason, you read anything right now?
I just finished up the Durable Trades.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that was a fun read. Just getting all the stats on all the different jobs and getting perspectives on what do they entail and how many people take part in those careers. It's just neat, just a neat thing to know, neat thing to realize.
Well, for the younger guys out there, that would be a pretty useful, or even not, like if you're just looking for a side gig. The book, it's by Rory Groves, I believe. Is it? It's called Durable Trades, and he goes through trades that have historically stood the test of time, and he rates them on, if I'm not mistaken, 5 criteria. So it's like historical stability, resistance to like supply shocks, how expensive it is to get started, family centeredness,
how likely you can support a family on it,
income potential. And then, I think the first one was shepherd. It's like the highest because it's, sheep are relatively cheap compared to cattle. They are, they're less dangerous because they're not as heavy, so a kid can be around them a little more easily. You can, if you know what you're doing, you can make money with it. It's not, there's not a lot of equipment to buy. And he kind of works his way through. There's like a top 20 or 25, and then he gives some shorter excerpts for some like lesser, like lawyer is one of them. It's like, well, this has been around a long time. The cost of entry is kind of high because you got to get education, but it's worth it if that's something that you're interested in doing. So if that's something where you're like, I kind of, I have some time or I have some energy, I would like to supplement my family's income and maybe teach skills to my kids, a trade, something like that might be really useful to them. Even if it's not something they do long term, you can develop a lot of like human potential by teaching them how to husband a skill in a trade. That might give you some good ideas for like what would be something I could get into with zero experience. There's going to be answers in there. So
yeah, I think we're a couple years into a renewal of interest in the trades as an alternative to like college debt and having to go to a company with a woke DEI department that's going to use HR to scold you into conformity. But, if you're someone who's like, yeah, I've kind of felt that in the zeitgeist, I don't know where to start, that's where I would say start. Yeah. And all the sort of career summaries you've been talking about are wonderful reads. But I think the 2 essays that open the book are worth the cost of purchase. So that's a great book to have in your library.
It's very interesting. All right, well, I think we're going to wrap it up. So we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thank you.
I heard the warden say, here's a dead man walking. Guard gave a nod, pointed me to my cell. Seems like ages I've lived in cages. Might seem strange, but I like how they feel.